Seth, I've got to ask you about this photo. When you look at it, do you think it's Sebastian?
I do.
You're sure?
Pretty sure.
And I understand you drove to North Carolina to check it out. What did you find?
She stood frozen at the rest stop, her phone trembling in her hand. The boy was maybe 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar, his thin frame almost swallowed by the shadows. Dark-rimmed glasses, pale skin, withdrawn posture. Something about him made her stomach drop, a recognition she couldn't quite place, like seeing a face from a dream you can't remember having. An adult woman walked ahead of him, not looking back, her stride purposeful and detached. The boy didn't follow immediately. He just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for permission to exist. She pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over the camera app. Should I? Her heart hammered. What if I'm wrong? But what if she wasn't? What if this was the boy from the news, the one who vanished without a trace 2 months ago, hundreds of miles away in Tennessee? She took the photograph. She didn't know if she was looking at a missing child or a ghost. 2 months earlier. The 26th of February 2024, Hendersonville, Tennessee. Sebastian Rogers was 15 years old, but in many ways, he was still learning how to navigate a world that didn't always make sense to him. Diagnosed with autism, Sebastian thrived on routine, on predictability, on the small comforts that made life feel manageable. He wore dark-rimmed glasses that framed his gentle eyes, and when the sun was too bright or the world felt too loud, he'd slip on a pair of sunglasses, his quiet armor against overstimulation. He wasn't the kind of kid who drew attention. He didn't cause trouble. He didn't wander off without warning. He was a homebody, someone who found safety in familiar spaces, familiar faces, familiar rhythms. His family knew his patterns. They knew his needs. They knew him. That's why what happened next made absolutely no sense. The night of February 25th was unremarkable. Dinner, homework, the usual evening routine. Sebastian went to bed like he always did. In the home he shared with his family in Hendersonville, a quiet, suburban community just outside Nashville, where neighbors knew each other's names and kids rode bikes down tree-lined streets. There was no argument that night, no tension, no sign that anything was wrong. Sebastian's room was on the ground floor. His bed was made. His belongings were in place. The window was closed. The door was shut. And then, sometime in the dark hours between midnight and dawn, Sebastian Rogers disappeared. No one heard him leave. No one saw him go. There was no forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass. The doors were still secure, the windows were still latched. His shoes were gone, but nothing else seemed disturbed. It was as if he had simply evaporated into the night, leaving behind only questions and a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. When morning came, the realization hit like a freight train. Sebastian's bed was empty. His family searched the house, calling his name, checking every room, every closet, every corner where a teenage boy might hide. Nothing. They checked the yard, the garage, the street. Still nothing. Panic set in fast. At 6:47 a.m., the 911 call was made. "My son is missing. He's 15. He has autism. He wouldn't just leave. Something's wrong. Please, you have to help us find him." The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, but the urgency was understood. A vulnerable teenager, a child with special needs, a disappearance with no explanation. Within minutes, Hendersonville police were on the scene. Within hours, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation was involved. Within days, the search would become one of the most extensive missing persons operations the state had seen in years. But in those first frantic moments, all anyone could think was, where is Sebastian? The initial search was immediate and aggressive. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual during the night. The answer, over and over, was the same. No, nothing. We didn't see anything. Surveillance cameras from nearby homes were reviewed frame by frame. Investigators were looking for anything, a shadow, a figure, a vehicle, headlights sweeping across a driveway. But the footage revealed nothing. No movement, no disturbance. No sign of Sebastian leaving on foot or being taken by car. It was as if he had never been there at all. Search and rescue teams were deployed. Volunteers combed through wooded areas near the Rogers home. K-9 units sniffed through brush and along creek beds. Drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras swept overhead, scanning for heat signatures in the cold February air. Nothing. Sebastian's face was plastered across local news stations. His photograph, those dark-rimmed glasses, that quiet smile was shared thousands of times on social media. Tips began pouring in. Possible sightings, theories, speculation, but none of it led anywhere. Days turned into a week, the week turned into 2. The search radius expanded. Neighboring counties were alerted. Statewide bulletins were issued, but still, there was no trace of Sebastian Rogers. No clothing, no belongings, no footprints, no witnesses, just an empty bed and a family shattered by the unthinkable. Investigators were baffled. In most missing persons cases, there's something, a clue, a lead, a direction to pursue. A runaway leaves a trail, an abduction leaves evidence, an accident leaves a body. But Sebastian's case had none of that. It defied every investigative pattern, every statistical probability. He was a teenager with autism who relied on routine and familiarity. He wasn't the type to run away. He didn't have a history of wandering. He didn't have conflicts with his family. He didn't have a secret life online or a hidden relationship that might explain a sudden departure. And yet, he was gone. The lack of evidence wasn't just frustrating, it was terrifying. Because if there was no evidence, then what were they supposed to follow? How do you find someone who left no trace? The case began to take on an almost supernatural quality in the public's mind. How does a 15-year-old boy vanish from a locked house in the middle of the night without anyone seeing or hearing a thing? How does he disappear without leaving a single clue behind? Some people whispered about abduction. Others speculated about foul play. A few even suggested something darker, something that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. But the investigators didn't deal in whispers or speculation. They dealt in facts. And the facts, as sparse as they were, pointed to one undeniable truth. Sebastian Rogers was missing, and no one knew where he was. As February gave way to March, the media coverage began to fade. The search efforts continued, but the initial frenzy had quieted. Sebastian's family held on to hope, but the silence was deafening. Every day, without answers, was another day of agony, another night of wondering if he was safe, if he was scared, if he was still alive. The case was active, but it was stalling. Investigators had exhausted their immediate leads. They were waiting for a tip, a sighting, a break. And then, in late April, 2 months after Sebastian disappeared, something happened. A photograph surfaced. A photograph taken at a rest stop in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, hundreds of miles from Hendersonville. A photograph of a boy who looked exactly like Sebastian Rogers. Before we go any further, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because this case is about to take a turn no one saw coming. The moment Sebastian was reported missing, Hendersonville became a city on high alert. This wasn't just another runaway teenager case. This was a vulnerable child with autism who had vanished without explanation, and every second that ticked by made the situation more critical. The Hendersonville Police Department immediately activated their missing persons protocol, but they knew from the start that this case required more resources, more expertise, more manpower than they could provide alone. By mid-morning on February 26th, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had joined the effort, bringing with them specialized units trained in child abduction and endangered missing persons cases. Search and rescue teams were mobilized. Volunteer organizations were contacted. The community was put on notice. Sebastian Rogers needed to be found, and he needed to be found fast. The command center was established at the Hendersonville Police Department, where investigators began coordinating what would become one of the most extensive search operations in recent Tennessee history. Maps were spread across tables, grids were drawn, assignments were made. Every available officer, every trained volunteer, every resource the state could spare was being funneled into one singular mission: bring Sebastian home. The urgency was palpable. Everyone understood what was at stake. A 15-year-old boy with autism, missing in late February when nighttime temperatures could drop into the 30s. If he was outside, if he was lost, if he was hurt, time was not on their side. The search grid was divided into zones, each one assigned to a specific team with a specific objective. The immediate area surrounding the Rogers home was the first priority. Wooded areas stretched behind the neighborhood, dense with trees and underbrush that could easily conceal a person. Search teams moved through these woods methodically, calling Sebastian's name, looking for any sign of disturbance: broken branches, footprints, discarded clothing. They found nothing. Beyond the woods were open fields, then rural roads that wound through the outskirts of Hendersonville, leading to farms and isolated properties where someone could disappear without being noticed. Every road was driven, every property was checked. Still nothing. Water searches were initiated almost immediately. Old Hickory Lake sat just a few miles from Sebastian's home, its cold, dark waters a grim possibility that no one wanted to consider but couldn't ignore. Dive teams were brought in, their boats cutting across the surface while sonar equipment scanned the depths below. The lake was vast, its shoreline stretching for miles, and the search was painstaking. Every cove, every inlet, every submerged structure was examined. Days passed. The divers found nothing. No clothing, no belongings, no body. It was a relief, but it was also another dead end. Aerial drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and thermal imaging technology were deployed, sweeping over the landscape from above. The thermal cameras could detect body heat, even through foliage, even in the dark. If Sebastian was out there, if he was hiding or injured or unconscious, the drones should have been able to find him. They flew grid patterns over the woods, over the fields, over the neighborhoods. The operators watched their screens intently, looking for that telltale heat signature that would indicate a human presence. They saw deer. They saw stray dogs. They saw nothing that looked like a missing teenager. K9 units were brought in, their noses far more reliable than any camera or piece of technology. The dogs were given items of Sebastian's clothing to establish his scent, then released to track. They moved through the neighborhood, through the yards, along the streets. The handlers watched their dogs carefully, looking for any sign of interest, any indication that they'd picked up a trail. But the dogs seemed confused. They'd catch a scent near the house, then lose it. They'd circle back, try again, and lose it again. It was as if Sebastian's scent simply stopped existing beyond a certain point, as if he'd been lifted into the air and carried away. The neighborhood canvassing was exhaustive. Officers went door to door, speaking with every resident within a mile radius of the Rogers home. Did you see anything unusual on the night of February 25th, or the early morning of February 26th? Did you hear anything? A car engine? Voices? Footsteps? The answers were frustratingly consistent. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. It was a quiet night. Everything seemed normal. One neighbor mentioned hearing a dog barking around 3 a.m., but that wasn't unusual. Another said they'd gotten up to use the bathroom around 2 a.m. and glanced out the window, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The street was empty. The houses were dark. There was no sign of Sebastian. Surveillance footage became a critical focus. Investigators collected video from every doorbell camera, every security system, every traffic camera within a 2-mile radius. They sat in darkened rooms, watching hours upon hours of grainy footage, looking for anything that might provide a clue. A figure walking down the street, a vehicle driving slowly through the neighborhood, headlights turning into a driveway, but the footage revealed nothing. No movement, no vehicles, no Sebastian. It was as if the night had swallowed him whole and left no evidence behind. Sebastian's autism added another layer of complexity to the search. Investigators consulted with specialists who understood how autism might influence his behavior in a crisis. Would he respond to his name being called, or would he retreat further into hiding? Would he seek out familiar places, or would he become disoriented and wander aimlessly? Would he approach strangers for help, or would he avoid human contact altogether? The answers weren't clear-cut. Every individual with autism is different, and Sebastian's specific tendencies had to be taken into account. His family explained that he was drawn to water, that he found it calming. That information sent search teams back to Old Hickory Lake, back to creeks and ponds and drainage ditches. They found nothing. His family also mentioned that he liked routine, that he didn't handle change well, that he wouldn't voluntarily leave his comfort zone. That made his disappearance even more baffling. If Sebastian wouldn't leave on his own, then how did he end up gone? The first week was a blur of activity and mounting dread. Volunteers showed up by the hundreds, ordinary people who wanted to help, who couldn't stand the thought of a child being lost and alone. They walked through fields and forests, calling Sebastian's name until their voices went hoarse. They handed out flyers with his photograph, posting them on telephone poles and storefront windows. They shared his information on social media, spreading the word across Tennessee and beyond. The community rallied in a way that was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, because despite all the effort, despite all the hope, there were no results. No credible sightings, no solid leads. Just an ever-growing sense that something was terribly, inexplicably wrong. By the end of the first week, the initial surge of adrenaline had given way to a grim determination. The search wasn't over, it would never be over until Sebastian was found, but the reality was setting in. This wasn't going to be a quick resolution. This wasn't going to be a story with a happy ending in the first 48 hours. Sebastian Rogers had vanished, and despite the best efforts of law enforcement, despite the tireless work of volunteers, despite the prayers of a community, no one had any idea where he was. The silence was deafening, the absence of evidence was maddening, and the clock just kept ticking. What time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments, and stay with me, because this story is just getting started. As the days stretched into weeks, the investigation into Sebastian Rogers' disappearance became a study in frustration. Every lead that came in was followed up on, no matter how unlikely it seemed. A tip would arrive. Someone thought they saw a boy matching Sebastian's description at a gas station 30 miles away. Investigators would pull surveillance footage, interview the clerk, canvass the area. The boy in question would turn out to be someone else entirely, a local kid who just happened to have dark hair and glasses. Another caller would report seeing someone who looked like Sebastian getting into a car at a rest stop. Officers would track down the vehicle, locate the driver, verify their story. It wasn't Sebastian. It was never Sebastian. Each dead end chipped away at the hope that had fueled those first frantic days of searching. The tip line was flooded with calls, some genuine and well-meaning, others less so. Psychics called, claiming they'd had visions of where Sebastian could be found. Conspiracy theorists spun elaborate tales involving trafficking rings and underground networks. Well-intentioned but misguided citizens reported sightings that turned out to be based on outdated photographs or mistaken identity. Every single tip had to be investigated. Every single one had to be ruled out. It was exhausting work, and it yielded nothing. The investigators knew that somewhere in that mountain of tips could be the one piece of information that cracked the case wide open, but finding it felt like searching for a needle in a haystack while blindfolded. Sebastian's family was living a nightmare that had no end in sight. They appeared at press conferences, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief, pleading with the public for any information that might bring their son home. His mother's voice would crack as she described Sebastian, his love of routine, his gentle nature, the way he'd light up when talking about his favorite subjects. She begged whoever might have him to let him go, to bring him back safely. She spoke directly to Sebastian, in case he was out there somewhere watching, telling him that they loved him, that they were looking for him, that they would never stop looking for him. His father stood beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes red-rimmed, struggling to maintain composure while his world fell apart. The pain was visceral, impossible to watch without feeling it yourself. The family's anguish was compounded by the questions that had no answers. Where was their son? Was he alive? Was he suffering? Was he scared? Was he calling out for them? The not knowing was its own special kind of torture, a limbo where hope and despair existed in equal measure. They couldn't grieve because they didn't know if there was anything to grieve. They couldn't move forward because there was nowhere to move forward to. They were stuck in a moment that refused to end, waiting for news that never came. Social media became both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, Sebastian's story reached millions of people, far beyond what traditional media could have achieved. His photograph was shared across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Awareness was raised. People were looking. But social media also became a breeding ground for speculation and armchair detective work that often did more harm than good. Online sleuths dissected every detail of the case, constructing elaborate theories based on incomplete information and wild assumptions. Some accused family members of involvement, pointing to perceived inconsistencies in their statements or behavior. Others claimed it was an abduction by a stranger, a trafficking operation, a planned disappearance. The theories multiplied faster than they could be debunked, creating a fog of misinformation that obscured the actual facts. The noise was overwhelming. For every genuine attempt to help, there were a dozen conspiracy theories and baseless accusations. The family was subjected to harassment and suspicion from people who had never met them, who knew nothing about their lives beyond what they'd read in a headline or seen in a 30-second news clip. Investigators had to waste valuable time addressing false narratives and correcting misinformation instead of focusing on the actual investigation. It was a reminder of the dark side of the digital age, where everyone has a platform and not everyone uses it responsibly. The most unsettling aspect of the case was the complete absence of evidence. In most missing persons investigations, there's something to work with. A witness who saw the person leaving, a credit card transaction that places them in a specific location, cell phone data that tracks their movements, security footage that captures them in the hours before they disappeared. But Sebastian's case had none of that. No witnesses, no transactions, no cell phone, he didn't have one, no footage. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist the moment he left his bed. There was no evidence of foul play, but there was also no evidence of anything else. No indication that he'd run away, no sign that he'd met with an accident, no clue as to where he might have gone or who he might have gone with. Investigators explored every possibility. They looked into registered sex offenders in the area. They examined Sebastian's online activity, though it was minimal. They interviewed his friends, his teachers, anyone who had regular contact with him. They searched databases for similar cases, looking for patterns that might provide insight. They consulted with experts in autism, in child psychology, in criminal behavior. They did everything by the book, and then some, and still they had nothing. The case wasn't just difficult, it was unprecedented. Teenagers don't just vanish into thin air. But Sebastian had. As February turned into March and March turned into April, the media attention began to fade. Sebastian's story, which had dominated local news for weeks, was gradually replaced by other headlines, other tragedies, other mysteries. The search efforts continued, but the volunteers who had shown up by the hundreds in those first days dwindled to a dedicated few. The press conferences became less frequent. The updates became shorter and less detailed. To the outside world, it seemed like the case was going cold. But behind the scenes, investigators were still working. They were still following up on tips. They were still reviewing evidence. They were still searching. Because that's what you do when a child is missing. You don't give up. You don't stop. You keep going, even when every lead turns into a dead end, even when the odds seem impossible, even when hope feels like a fragile thing that could shatter at any moment. Sebastian Rogers was still out there somewhere, and someone, somewhere, had to know something. Late April 2024. 2 months had passed since Sebastian Rogers disappeared from his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. 2 months of searching, of waiting, of hoping against hope that somehow, somewhere, he would be found. The case had settled into a painful routine, investigators still working leads, the family still pleading for answers, the public still sharing his photograph. But there had been no breakthrough, no moment that changed everything, until a woman stopped at a rest area in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, hundreds of miles from where Sebastian had last been seen. She was traveling through, taking a break from the long drive, stretching her legs, using the restroom. It was an ordinary stop at an ordinary rest area, the kind of place you pass through without giving it much thought. Concrete structures, vending machines, picnic tables scattered under trees, travelers coming and going, everyone focused on their own journey, their own destination. She wasn't looking for anything unusual. She wasn't expecting to see anything that would change the course of an investigation. But sometimes, the most significant moments happen when you're not looking for them. She was walking back to her car when she saw him, a teenage boy, thin and pale, standing partially behind a concrete pillar near the restroom facilities. He wasn't doing anything particularly unusual, just standing there, motionless, his posture withdrawn and uncertain. But something about him caught her attention. Something made her look twice. He was wearing dark-rimmed glasses, the kind that framed his face in a way that seemed both distinctive and familiar. His clothes hung loosely on his frame. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the afternoon light. He looked lost, or maybe not lost, maybe just disconnected, like he was physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. An adult woman was walking ahead of him, moving with purpose toward the parking area. She didn't look back. She didn't check to see if the boy was following. She just walked, her stride confident and detached, as if she expected him to keep up without needing to be told. The boy didn't follow immediately. He stayed behind the pillar, his body language suggesting hesitation, maybe even fear. He wasn't calling out to the woman. He wasn't trying to catch up. He was just standing there, waiting. That's when it hit her. The recognition wasn't immediate. It was more like a slow dawning, a puzzle piece clicking into place. She'd seen that face before, those glasses, that frame. Where had she seen him? And then it came to her. The missing boy from Tennessee, the one who'd been all over the news a couple months back. Sebastian Rogers, the 15-year-old with autism who had vanished without a trace. Could this be him? Was she looking at a missing child? Or was her mind playing tricks on her, seeing what she wanted to see because she'd been following the case? Her heart started pounding. She pulled out her phone, her hands suddenly unsteady. Should she approach him? Should she say something? What if she was wrong? What if she scared him? Or worse, what if she alerted the woman and they disappeared before anyone could verify who they were? What if this was Sebastian and her interference caused him to be taken away before help could arrive? The questions raced through her mind, each one more urgent than the last. She had seconds to make a decision, seconds to choose between action and caution. She chose caution. She chose documentation. She opened her camera app, trying to be discreet, trying not to draw attention to herself. Her finger hovered over the screen. This felt invasive, wrong somehow, taking a photograph of a stranger without permission. But what if this was Sebastian? What if this was the break everyone had been waiting for? What if she was the only person who could provide the evidence that brought him home? She took the photograph. One shot, clear enough to see the boy's face, his glasses, his posture. Clear enough to see the woman ahead of him. Clear enough to verify or rule out whether this was the missing teenager from Tennessee. The woman and the boy moved toward the parking lot. The witness watched them get into a vehicle and drive away. She stood there for a moment, her phone still in her hand, her mind racing. What should she do? Call the police? But which police? North Carolina or Tennessee? Would they take her seriously, or would they dismiss her as another well-meaning citizen with a false sighting? She decided to go straight to the source. She pulled up the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's website and found the tip line for Sebastian Rogers' case. She attached the photograph and typed out a message. I don't know if this is him, but I had to send it. I saw this boy at a rest stop in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He matches the description. Please check this out. She hit send and waited. Part of her wondered if she'd done the right thing. Part of her wondered if she'd just wasted investigators' time with another dead-end lead. But another part of her, the part that had seen that boy's face, that had felt the wrongness of the situation, knew she'd done exactly what she needed to do. If there was even a chance that this was Sebastian Rogers, then someone needed to know. The photograph arrived at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's tip line within minutes. It was flagged immediately. An investigator opened the file, looked at the image, and felt a jolt of recognition. The boy in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to Sebastian Rogers. The dark-rimmed glasses, the thin frame, the pale complexion. The age appeared right. The physical characteristics matched. This wasn't just another vague sighting or blurry image captured from a distance. This was a clear, detailed photograph of a boy who looked exactly like the missing teenager they'd been searching for. The investigator immediately began analyzing the photograph. The first step was verifying its authenticity. In the age of digital manipulation, any image could be altered, doctored, or fabricated. But the metadata told a story. The photograph had been taken with a smartphone camera. The timestamp showed late April 2024. The GPS coordinates embedded in the file placed it at a rest stop in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, approximately 300 miles from Hendersonville. The image showed no signs of manipulation, no editing software had touched it, no filters had been applied. This was an authentic, unaltered photograph, taken at the location and time indicated. The location was verified through cross-referencing. The rest stop in the photograph matched known rest areas along major highways in western North Carolina. The background details, the concrete structures, the layout, the surrounding landscape all checked out. This wasn't a fabricated scene. This was a real place, and someone had taken a real photograph of a real boy who looked disturbingly similar to Sebastian Rogers. The TBI moved quickly. This was the first tangible lead they'd had in 2 months. The first piece of evidence that suggested Sebastian might still be alive, might still be out there, might still be recoverable. But there was a complication. The photograph had been taken in North Carolina, which meant it fell outside Tennessee's jurisdiction. Protocol demanded that the case be handed over to the appropriate authorities. The TBI contacted the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation and forwarded the photograph along with all relevant case information. This is a potential sighting of a missing, endangered juvenile from Tennessee. The photograph was taken at a rest stop in your jurisdiction. We need your assistance in identifying the individuals and determining if this is our missing person. The NCSBI received the file and opened their own investigation. They had the photograph, they had the location, they had a timeline. For the first time since Sebastian Rogers disappeared, there was something concrete to work with, not a vague tip, not a possible sighting that couldn't be verified, but an actual photograph of a boy who might be the missing teenager, taken at a specific location at a specific time. It was the kind of break that investigators dream about, the kind of evidence that can turn a cold case into an active rescue operation. Back in Tennessee, Sebastian's family was notified that a potential lead had emerged. The details were kept vague. Investigators didn't want to give false hope, didn't want to promise something they couldn't deliver. But for the first time in 2 months, there was a reason to believe that Sebastian might be found, that he might be alive, that this nightmare might finally have an end. The family clung to that hope like a lifeline, even as they tried to prepare themselves for the possibility that this lead, like all the others, might go nowhere. The photograph circulated among investigators, analysts, and specialists. Everyone who looked at it had the same reaction. The resemblance was uncanny. The boy in the image looked like Sebastian Rogers. Not similar, not kind of like him, but exactly like him. The glasses were identical. The build was right. The age matched. If this wasn't Sebastian, then it was someone who could be his twin. And if it was Sebastian, then the questions multiplied exponentially. Who was the woman with him? Where were they going? How did he end up 300 miles away in North Carolina? Was he being held against his will, or had he gone willingly? Was he in danger, or was he safe? For the first time in 2 months, there was hope. Real, tangible hope. A face, a location, a lead. Something to pursue, something to investigate, something that might finally bring Sebastian Rogers home. If you're feeling the weight of this case like I am, do me a favor, hit that like button and share this video. Sebastian's story needs to be heard. And stick around, because what happens next is going to leave you with more questions than answers. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation took control of the case with the urgency it demanded. This wasn't just another tip to be filed away and checked when time permitted. This was a clear photograph of a boy who bore an extraordinary resemblance to a missing child from Tennessee, taken at a verifiable location within their jurisdiction. The NCSBI assembled a team of investigators and analysts, all focused on a single objective: identify the individuals in the photograph and determine whether the boy was Sebastian Rogers. The clock was ticking. If this was Sebastian, every moment of delay was another moment he remained missing, another moment he could be moved further away, another moment the trail could go cold. The first step was identifying the exact rest stop where the photograph had been taken. The GPS metadata provided coordinates, but investigators needed visual confirmation. They cross-referenced the image with known rest areas along Interstate 40 and the Blue Ridge Parkway, comparing architectural features, landscaping, and layout. Within hours, they had a match. The photograph had been taken at a rest area off Interstate 40 inches western North Carolina, a busy stop frequented by travelers moving between Tennessee and the eastern seaboard. It was a high-traffic location, which meant there should be surveillance footage. That footage could be the key to everything. Investigators contacted the North Carolina Department of Transportation, which maintained security cameras at rest stops throughout the state. They requested all available footage from the date and approximate time indicated by the photograph's metadata. The footage arrived in digital files that spanned hours of recording from multiple camera angles, Analysts began the painstaking process of reviewing every frame, looking for the boy in the dark-rimmed glasses and the woman who had been walking ahead of him. They found them. The cameras had captured their arrival, their movements through the rest area, and their departure. The footage was grainy but usable, and it provided critical information that the photograph alone could not. The surveillance footage showed a vehicle pulling into the rest stop parking lot. The woman exited first, followed by the boy. They walked toward the restroom facilities, the woman ahead, the boy trailing behind. The body language matched what the witness had described, the woman purposeful and detached, the boy hesitant and withdrawn. They spent approximately 10 minutes at the rest stop before returning to the vehicle and driving away. The cameras captured the vehicle's make, model, and license plate number. That license plate was the breakthrough investigators needed. It could be traced, it could lead them to the woman, and the woman could lead them to the boy. The license plate was run through North Carolina's Department of Motor Vehicles database. Within minutes, investigators had a name and an address. The vehicle was registered to a woman who lived in North Carolina. She was not from Tennessee. She had no apparent connection to Hendersonville or to Sebastian Rogers' family. But that didn't mean anything yet. Investigators needed more information before they could draw any conclusions. They began building a profile. Who was this woman? What was her background? Did she have a criminal record? Were there any red flags in her history that might suggest involvement in a child abduction? The background check revealed a woman with no criminal history, no outstanding warrants, no prior involvement with law enforcement. She appeared to be an ordinary citizen living an ordinary life, but appearances could be deceiving, and investigators knew better than to take anything at face value. They needed to locate her, interview her, and most importantly, identify the boy who had been with her. If that boy was Sebastian Rogers, then this case was about to break wide open. If he wasn't, then they were back to square one, chasing another dead end in a case that had already produced too many. While investigators worked to locate the woman, analysts focused on the boy in the photograph. They conducted frame-by-frame analysis of the surveillance footage, isolating the clearest images of his face. They compared those images to known photographs of Sebastian Rogers, looking for distinguishing features that could confirm or rule out a match. The dark-rimmed glasses were identical to the ones Sebastian wore. The build was consistent. The height appeared right for a 15-year-old boy. The facial structure showed similarities, the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the contour of the cheekbones. But photographic comparison alone wasn't enough. Lighting, angles, and image quality could all affect perception. What looked like a match to the human eye might not hold up under forensic scrutiny. Facial recognition technology was employed, though investigators knew its limitations. The software analyzed the geometric proportions of the boy's face in the surveillance footage and compared them to Sebastian's known photographs. The results came back with a probability rating, not a definitive answer. The technology suggested a possible match, but it couldn't confirm with certainty. Too many variables, too much room for error. The boy in the footage looked like Sebastian Rogers, but looking like someone and being someone are two different things. Investigators needed more than resemblance. They needed confirmation. Back in Tennessee, the TBI waited. They had done everything they could. They had forwarded the photograph, provided all case information, and offered full cooperation to their counterparts in North Carolina. Now it was a waiting game, and waiting was agony. Every hour that passed without an update felt like a lifetime. Was this the break they'd been praying for? Was Sebastian about to be found? Or was this just another cruel twist in a case that had already delivered too many disappointments? Sebastian's family was living in a state of suspended animation. They had been told about the photograph, about the investigation in North Carolina, about the possibility that the boy in the image might be their son. The hope was almost unbearable. For 2 months, they had existed in a void where every day brought no news, no progress, no answers. And now, suddenly, there was something. A photograph, a lead, a chance. But they had learned not to let hope run wild. They had been through too many false alarms, too many tips that led nowhere. They wanted to believe. They desperately wanted to believe. But belief without confirmation was just another form of torture. The public, those who had been following Sebastian's case since the beginning, waited too. The photograph had not been released to the media. Investigators wanted to maintain operational security while the investigation was ongoing. But word had leaked. as it always does, that a significant lead was being pursued in North Carolina. Online communities that had been dissecting the case for months erupted with speculation. Was this it? Was Sebastian about to be found? The anticipation was electric, the tension palpable. Everyone wanted the same thing, a resolution, an answer, an end to the uncertainty. Days passed. The NCSBI worked methodically, following every protocol, checking every detail. They located the woman whose vehicle had been captured on surveillance footage. They made contact. They arranged an interview. They asked about the boy who had been with her at the rest stop. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture began to come together. The investigators were close. They were so close to having an answer. But the answer, when it came, would not be what anyone expected. What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny? Rainy? Let me know and keep watching, because the answer is coming. The call came from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation on a Tuesday afternoon, several days after the photograph had first been submitted. The NCSBI had completed their investigation. They had identified both individuals in the photograph. They had conducted interviews. They had reviewed all available evidence, and they had reached a conclusion. The boy in the photograph was not Sebastian Rogers. The TBI investigators who received the news felt the weight of it immediately. This had been the most promising lead in 2 months. The photograph had been clear, authentic, and verifiable. The resemblance had been striking. Everyone who had seen the image thought it could be Sebastian. Some were convinced it was Sebastian, and now they were being told it wasn't. The NCSBI explained that they had positively identified both the woman and the boy. The woman was exactly who the vehicle registration indicated, a North Carolina resident with no connection to the case. The boy was a minor who had been traveling with her legitimately. He was not a missing child. He was not Sebastian Rogers. The case was closed from North Carolina's perspective. But there was a problem. The NCSBI could not provide supporting details. Privacy protocols involving minors prevented them from releasing the boy's identity, his photograph, or any comparison images that would allow independent verification of their conclusion. They could not share information about his relationship to the woman or the reason they had been traveling together. They could not explain why he bore such a striking resemblance to Sebastian Rogers. All they could offer was their official determination. The boy in the photograph had been identified, and he was not the missing teenager from Tennessee. The TBI was expected to accept this conclusion on faith, based on the professional judgment of their counterparts in North Carolina. The frustration was immediate and profound. How could anyone be expected to accept this conclusion without seeing the evidence? The photograph showed a boy who looked exactly like Sebastian Rogers. The dark-rimmed glasses were identical. The build was right. The age appeared correct. The facial features matched. And now investigators were being told that despite all of these similarities, despite the uncanny resemblance, the boy was someone else entirely. But where was the proof? Where were the comparison images that would put the question to rest? Where was the transparency that would allow the TBI, the family, and the public to understand how this determination had been reached? The answer was always the same: privacy protocols. The boy in the photograph was a minor. His identity was protected by law. Releasing his photograph or any identifying information would violate his privacy rights and potentially expose him to unwanted attention or harassment. The NCSBI had done their job. They had investigated thoroughly. They had reached a conclusion based on evidence that they could not share, and that conclusion was final. The boy was not Sebastian Rogers. The lead was dead. The TBI had no choice but to accept the determination. They had no jurisdiction in North Carolina. They had no authority to demand additional information or to conduct their own independent investigation of the individuals in the photograph. They had followed protocol by forwarding the lead to the appropriate agency, and that agency had followed protocol by investigating and reporting their findings. The system had worked exactly as it was designed to work, but the result felt hollow, incomplete, unsatisfying. A lead that had generated so much hope, so much anticipation, had been closed without any publicly verifiable evidence to support the conclusion. The official stance was clear and unambiguous. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation had identified both individuals in the photograph. The boy was not Sebastian Rogers. The photograph was no longer considered a viable lead in the case. The investigation into Sebastian's disappearance remained active and ongoing, but this particular avenue had been exhausted. Investigators would continue to pursue other leads, follow up on other tips, and search for other evidence. But as far as the photograph from the Blue Ridge Mountains rest stop was concerned, the matter was closed. Sebastian's family received the news with a mixture of emotions that defied easy description. Devastation, certainly, the hope that had sustained them for the past several days, the belief that maybe, finally, their son had been found, was shattered in an instant. The photograph had seemed so promising, the resemblance had been so strong. They had allowed themselves to believe, just for a moment, that the nightmare might be ending. And now they were being told it wasn't him. It was someone else. Someone who looked like their son but wasn't their son. The emotional whiplash was almost unbearable. But there was also a strange, conflicted sense of relief. If the boy in the photograph wasn't Sebastian, then at least they knew he wasn't with that woman. In that situation, whatever that situation might have been. The uncertainty about whether their son was being held against his will, whether he was in danger, whether he was trying to escape that particular uncertainty, had been resolved. But it had been replaced by the same agonizing questions that had haunted them since February. Where was Sebastian? Was he alive? Would they ever see him again? The confusion was perhaps the hardest part to process. How could the boy in the photograph not be Sebastian when he looked so much like him? The family had seen the image. They had studied it. They had compared it to their own photographs of their son. The similarities were undeniable, and yet they were being told that despite those similarities, despite the glasses and the build and the age and the facial features, it was someone else. They wanted to believe the investigators. They wanted to trust that the NCSBI had done their job properly and reached the correct conclusion. But without seeing the evidence, without understanding how the determination had been made, belief required a leap of faith that was difficult to make when your child's life hung in the balance. The public reaction was swift and skeptical. When word leaked that the photograph had been investigated and ruled out as a lead, the online communities that had been following the case erupted with questions and doubts. How could investigators be so sure? Why couldn't they release comparison images? What were they hiding? The lack of transparency fueled conspiracy theories and speculation. Some people insisted that the boy in the photograph was Sebastian and that the official determination was part of a cover-up. Others argued that the resemblance was just a coincidence, that the human brain is wired to see patterns and connections even where none exist. The debate raged on, but it changed nothing. The official determination stood. The boy in the photograph was not Sebastian Rogers, and Sebastian was still missing. The resemblance haunted everyone who had seen the photograph. It wasn't just a passing similarity, the kind where someone vaguely reminds you of someone else if you squint and tilt your head. This was specific. This was detailed. This was a boy who wore the exact same style of dark-rimmed glasses that Sebastian Rogers wore. A boy whose thin frame and pale complexion matched Sebastian's physical description perfectly. A boy whose posture withdrawn, hesitant, standing slightly apart as if uncertain of his place, mirrored the body language that people who knew Sebastian would recognize. How do you explain that level of coincidence? How do you account for all of those specific details aligning in one person who just happens to be at a rest stop 300 miles from where Sebastian disappeared? The glasses were particularly striking. They weren't generic frames that thousands of teenagers might wear. They were distinctive, the kind that become part of someone's identity, part of how people recognize them. Sebastian's family had provided multiple photographs showing him wearing those exact glasses, and the boy in the rest stop photograph was wearing what appeared to be identical frames. Same shape, same color, same style. Was it possible that two different teenage boys, similar in age and build, would wear the exact same distinctive glasses? Possible, yes, but probable. That was harder to accept. The lack of transparency became a focal point for frustration and doubt. In an age where information is readily available, where transparency is expected, the refusal to release comparison images felt like stonewalling. The official explanation was clear. Privacy protocols protect minors, and releasing the identity or photograph of the boy would violate those protections. But to families desperate for answers, to a public invested in finding Sebastian, To armchair investigators who had spent months analyzing every detail of the case, that explanation felt insufficient. Why couldn't investigators release a side-by-side comparison with the boy's face obscured or blurred? Why couldn't they provide some form of evidence that would allow independent verification without compromising privacy? The absence of any supporting documentation left a vacuum that speculation and doubt rushed to fill. Privacy concerns are legitimate and important. Children deserve protection from public exposure, especially when they've done nothing wrong and simply had the misfortune of resembling a missing person. But the implementation of those protections in this case created a situation where the public was asked to accept a conclusion without being able to evaluate the evidence. "Trust us," the authorities said. "We've investigated. We've confirmed. The boy is not Sebastian." But trust is difficult when a child is missing, when every lead matters, when the stakes couldn't be higher. People wanted to trust. They wanted to believe that the investigators had done their job properly. But belief without evidence requires faith, and faith was in short supply. The witness who took the photograph remained convinced of what she had seen. In the days after the official determination was announced, she spoke to media outlets, carefully, reluctantly, still uncertain whether she should be drawing attention to herself. But she felt compelled to speak because she couldn't shake the conviction that the boy she had seen was Sebastian Rogers. She described the moment of recognition, the certainty she had felt, the reason she had taken the photograph in the first place. She wasn't someone prone to jumping to conclusions. She wasn't a conspiracy theorist or an attention seeker. She was an ordinary person who had seen something that troubled her and had done what she thought was right, and now she was being told she was wrong. But was she? She had looked into that boy's eyes, even from a distance. She had seen something in his demeanor that suggested he wasn't just any teenager traveling with a family member. She had seen something that made her think, this child needs help. Did the official determination change what she had witnessed, or did it just add another layer of mystery to an already inexplicable case? Alternative theories proliferated in the absence of definitive answers. Could the NCSBI have made a mistake? Could they have been misled by the woman they interviewed? Could there be more to the story than what was being publicly disclosed? Some theorists suggested that the boy might have been Sebastian, but that revealing his location would have compromised an ongoing investigation into who had taken him or how he had ended up in North Carolina. Others proposed that the resemblance was so strong because the boy was a relative of Sebastian's, someone from an extended family connection that hadn't been publicly disclosed. Still others insisted that the official determination was accurate and that the resemblance was simply an unfortunate coincidence, a reminder that in a country of hundreds of millions of people, doppelgangers exist. But the most haunting question remained unanswered. If the photograph wasn't Sebastian, then where is he? The rest stop lead had consumed attention and resources for days. It had generated hope and anticipation, and when it was ruled out, it left everyone back where they started, with no answers, no direction, no idea where to look next. Sebastian Rogers had vanished without a trace on the 26th of February 2024. 2 months later, a photograph had suggested he might have been found. And now, with that lead exhausted, the mystery was deeper than ever. A 15-year-old boy doesn't just disappear. He doesn't evaporate into thin air. He doesn't cease to exist. Someone, somewhere, knows something. Someone saw something. Someone has information that could break this case open. But who? And how do you find them when every lead turns into a dead end? The photograph from the Blue Ridge Mountains rest stop would remain one of the most debated and analyzed pieces of evidence in Sebastian Rogers' case. To some, it represented a missed opportunity, a lead that should have been pursued more aggressively or investigated more transparently. To others, it was a painful reminder of how desperately people wanted to find Sebastian, how willing they were to see him in every similar-looking teenager, how hope could cloud judgment, and to Sebastian's family, it was another emotional wound in a series of wounds that showed no sign of healing. They wanted to believe the official determination. They wanted to trust that investigators had done everything possible. But they also couldn't stop wondering, what if? What if the boy in the photograph was their son? What if he was right there, 300 miles away, and the chance to bring him home had slipped through their fingers? I want to hear from you. Do you think that photograph was really Sebastian? Or do you trust the official determination? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. We're diving deep into cases like this every week. Today, months after Sebastian Rogers disappeared from his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee, the investigation remains active. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has not closed this case. They have not moved it to the back burner. They have not given up. Every day, investigators continue to pursue leads, follow up on tips, and analyze any new information that comes in. This is not a cold case gathering dust in a file cabinet somewhere. This is an ongoing, active investigation into the disappearance of a vulnerable teenager who deserves to be found. The TBI has made it clear that they will not stop looking for Sebastian Rogers until they have answers, until they know what happened to him, until they can bring him home. The search for Sebastian continues in ways both official and grassroots. Volunteers who showed up in those first desperate days haven't all gone home. Some have stayed involved, organizing periodic search efforts, distributing flyers, keeping Sebastian's name in the public consciousness. Advocacy groups that specialize in missing and exploited children have taken up his case, using their platforms and resources to spread awareness beyond Tennessee's borders. Sebastian's face appears on missing persons databases, on social media feeds, on community bulletin boards. His story is shared and reshared by people who have never met him but who refuse to let him be forgotten. Because that's what happens when a case goes cold. People forget. The media moves on. The public's attention shifts to the next tragedy, the next mystery. But Sebastian's supporters are determined not to let that happen. Social media campaigns keep his case alive in the digital space where so many people spend their time. Hashtags dedicated to finding Sebastian trend periodically, pushed by coordinated efforts from advocacy groups and concerned citizens. His photograph circulates with appeals for information, for sightings, for anything that might provide a clue. True crime communities that analyze unsolved cases have dedicated threads and discussions to Sebastian's disappearance, examining every detail, proposing theories, keeping the conversation going. Some of this attention is helpful, some of it veers into speculation and conspiracy, but all of it serves a purpose. It keeps Sebastian Rogers from becoming just another statistic, just another missing child whose face fades from memory. Sebastian's family continues to live in the agonizing space between hope and despair. They haven't given up. They refuse to give up. They speak to media outlets whenever given the opportunity, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. They maintain a presence on social media, posting updates, sharing memories of Sebastian, reminding the world that he is not just a case number or a news story. He is a son, a brother, a real person with a family that loves him and wants him back. They mark the passage of time in painful milestones. His birthday comes and goes without him. Holidays are celebrated with an empty chair at the table. Every day that passes without answers is another day of torture, but they endure because what else can they do? Giving up is not an option. Accepting that they may never know what happened to him is not an option. They wait, they hope, they believe that somewhere, somehow, Sebastian is still out there. The public plays a crucial role in cases like this. Tips are still coming into the TBI's hotline. Some are credible, some are not. But every single one is followed up on because you never know which tip might be the one that breaks the case open. Every reported sighting is investigated. Every piece of information is evaluated. The public's eyes and ears extend the reach of law enforcement in ways that official resources alone cannot match. Someone out there might have seen something. Someone might know something. Someone might have information they don't even realize is important. That's why continued awareness matters. That's why sharing Sebastian's story matters. Because the more people who know his face, who know his story, who are watching for him, the greater the chance that he will be found. There is still hope. It may sound naive to say that after so many months without answers, after so many dead ends and false leads, but hope is not naive, it's necessary. Hope is what keeps investigators working the case. Hope is what keeps volunteers searching. Hope is what keeps Sebastian's family getting out of bed every morning and facing another day of uncertainty. One day, there will be answers. One day, the mystery of what happened to Sebastian Rogers will be solved. One day, he will come home. That day hasn't come yet, but it will. It has to. because the alternative that a 15-year-old boy with autism could simply vanish without a trace and never be found is too unbearable to accept. Sebastian Rogers is still missing. If you have any information, contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation immediately. And if this story moved you, please share it. Let's keep Sebastian's name alive. Let's bring him home. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.